The subject of castration for the purpose of preserving into adulthood the high voices of talented choir boys so that with further training and physical, if not sexual maturation, they might become highly remunerated virtuosos has fascinated modern audiences and readers, particularly since the 1994 release of the film Farinelli. Grown. In recent years, research on castration and singing by such scholars as Martha Feldman and Roger Freitas has shed much additional light on the phenomenon, helping us to understand its place in larger social and economic contexts of early modern Europe. Still, many aspects of the practice remain shadowy. Precisely because of the shame and scandal often associated with castration, we have little notion of where, when, or why young boys went under the knife. The music historian Charles Berne famously wrote in the early 1770s, "I inquired throughout Italy at what place boys were chiefly qualified for singing by castration, but could get no certain intelligence. I was told at Milan that it was at Venice that it was at Bologna, but at Bologna the fact was denied. I was referred to Florence, from Florence to Rome, and from Rome I was sent to Naples. The operation most certainly is against the law in all these places, as well as against nature, and all the Italians are so much ashamed of it that in every province they transfer it to some other." The perpetrators were usually said to be Norcini, surgeons trained in or around the Umbrian town of Norcia, who originally specialized in the removal of kidney or gallstones and the curing of hernias by means of semi-castration or cauterization, according to one source. They later gained notoriety as itinerant surgeons willing and able to castrate for musical rather than medical reasons. In my talk today, I'd like to elucidate a group of documents on castration from late 18th century Tuscany, a state then ruled by the reform-minded Grand Duke Pietro Leopoldo, the later emperor. These documents address a specific outbreak of castration, focusing on the legal status of the practice, the involvement of Norcini, and the facilitation of the operation by others. At the center of this episode was a provincial nobleman, the Cavaliere Bartolomeo Nucci of Brescia, with whom I'll be concerned in the latter part of my talk. The first pebble upon which I tripped, so to speak, in this documentary trail was a memorandum from 1778 in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, addressed to Pietro Leopoldo and citing discussions of the same topic in 1766. The memo begins with a cover note by Domenico Bricchieri Colombi, Auditore Fiscale, a position combining the duties of a minister of justice and an interior minister, after which follow three opinions labeled A, B, and C. The first two are competing drafts of legislation outlawing castration of boys if for the sole purpose of serving the pleasure of music. Bricchieri Colombi states his preference for proposal B, but in C, Giuliano Tosi, no relation to the singing teacher, and the other members of the Consulta state their opposition to any legislation on the matter. The moral arguments in A and B are not particularly novel. After all, already in 1761, Giuseppe Parini had decried the barbarity of castration in his ode La Musica. But these Tuscan officials go beyond the often cited prohibitions in ancient Roman law and offer parameters and punishments suited to current and local circumstances. Draft Law A, written in the voice of the sovereign, commands that whenever the castration of an individual is thought necessary by reason of some infirmity, it may not proceed without prior issuance of a license in writing to be given by the respective provincial commissioners who, prior to according it, must have ordered an examination by medical experts in order to verify the cause for which the operation is thought necessary. Otherwise, castration is generally forbidden, and in particular of boys in order to prepare them to be musicians, per stradarli alla musica. Furthermore, in case of such necessity, the operation must be performed by qualified surgeons, prohibiting anyone to make use of the so-called norcini, or for these norcini to involve themselves. As punishment for infractions, A proposes a fine of 1,300 lire to be divided equally between the accuser and the state treasury, and for norcini, 5 years of the public labors. For persons abetting norcini, or any persons abetting norcini, are likewise subject to punishment, including in attempts to evade the law by arranging for the operation outside the realm. Opinion B duplicates much of the content of A, but starts with a refutation of economic justifications for castration. I'll just leave that up there for a second. Here, too, the law and its penalties would apply not just to the principal transgressors, but also to those who mix themselves up in the business with seductive insinuations or with other cooperative help, and that's where Nucci will come in. However, in C, Tosi argues against draft laws A and B and advises the Grand Duke not to publish a law on the matter at all. Common sense is a sufficient remedy. I do not think that 1 or 2 cases would provide a motive for exaggerating with a public edict an abuse that one imagines being introduced into Tuscany of castrating boys in order to make them musici. It would seem to me that this would cause our government to be unfairly discredited, as if it had not been sufficiently vigilant or had been complicit in a disorder that all the laws condemn. Tosi objects also to the shame and notoriety that the subject even of a medically justifiable castration would endure on account of the required medical inspection and license in writing for the surgeon, a factor not unlike the public exposure that discourages many present-day rape victims from pressing charges. More crucially still, Tosi points out that a law forbidding castration harms the entire class of cerusici, prohibiting them from performing an operation within their competence for a type of illness that is as natural as any other, without a written license from the auditore fiscale, and without the approval of a fellow cerusico, who in some cases will know less about it than the practitioner himself. Cerusici were the general class of empirical, non-university trained surgeons, of which norcini were a subset. Tosi's worry about alienating cerusici was well-grounded, since they played an important role in both public health and criminal justice in Tuscany. Every quartiere in Florence had its government-appointed cerusico, as well as a medico and a levatrice, or midwife, and other jurisdictions within the state had theirs as well. In addition to serving the health needs of the local population, cerusici were responsible for reporting certain crimes to the authorities, especially if they involved injury or death. This is clear, for instance, from Clause 3 in the new Tuscan Criminal Code of November 1786, the so-called Riforma Leopoldina. Also initiating a legal action is the report by a cerusico or of whoever has the public obligation to report crimes. Tosi was in fact the official who took the largest role in drafting this major piece of legislation, which for the first time anywhere banned both torture and capital punishment. Not surprisingly, though, in light of Tosi's earlier opinion C, the text of the new criminal code says nothing about castration. As I've mentioned, the 1778 castration debate was a resumption of discussions from 1766, records of which are to be found in the papers of the Segreteria di Stato for that year. These reveal a specific case which provoked several months of discussions, correspondence, and at least one reprimand. The first mention is in an undated note labeled Affare di Pescia sopra l'abuso di castrare. Here it is said that the auditor fiscale, Bricchieri Colombi, at this time too, supporting the urgings of the Bishop of Pescia, states that the abuse of castrating boys in order to make them suited to the musical profession has taken root in that city. Pescia, a small city between Lucca and Pistoia, I have it labeled in red there, or was a small city between Lucca and Pistoia. At this time, its bishop was Donato Maria Arcangeli, a supporter of the Enlightenment, enemy of clerical corruption, and amateur architect and astronomer, as you can see from the celestial globe in his portrait. Already at this time, Bricchieri Colombi suggests an examination to verify the medical necessity of the operation and punishment of transgressors consisting of a year in prison for citizens, 5 years of public labor for foreigners. In a longer memo of March 31st, the memo referred to in the preamble of the 1778 document, Bricchieri Colombi informs Pietro Leopoldo that the bishop's account had been confirmed by the vicar of Pescia, Simon Pietro Rofia. The lay vicario or commissario was the local representative of the Florentine government with both judicial and administrative duties. The matter was again taken up in the meetings of the Consiglios di Stato in early May, at which time a name was attached to the previously vague charge of abetting castration. The judge in Pescia, that is, Rofia, shall give the utmost attention to crushing this abuse and shall proceed so that justice is done in the case of transgression. And the tribunal of the order shall warn Cavaliere Nucci not to abet such a misdeed. No first name is given, but the minutes of another meeting of the Consiglio make clear that the Cavaliere Nucci in question was Bartolomeo. The chivalric order of whose tribunal the minutes speak was the Sacred Military Order of St. Stephen, Pope and Martyr, about which I'll have more to say. Florentine officials seem not to have known much about Nucci, speculating in a draft letter of May 12th that he was perhaps transported by a strong inclination to harmony, about which they say he is very knowledgeable, and perhaps also by the idea of being helpful to poor people by going around suggesting that they subject their sons to the aforesaid barbarous operation in order to put them in a position to make a fortune. In fact, Nucci was a renowned maestro di canto, praised by Giambattista Mancini, singing teacher to the imperial court, in his treatise Pensieri e riflessioni pratiche sopra il canto figurato of 1774. Lamenting the decline in standards in singing in recent years, Mancini writes, "I am of the opinion that the only true schools in Italy that deserve the name are the Venetian conservatories, the Neapolitan conservatories, and the school of the Cavaliere Bartolomeo Nucci of Pescia. This Cavaliere, for his own pleasure, already for more than 40 years, is the only person who upholds the good system of the old masters. He instructs youths not in the hopes of profit, but purely for glory and humanity. For this reason, he does not admit to his school those who are incapable of succeeding, and those he does admit, he teaches with so much love and patience that they must necessarily become skillful." 2 letters from Nucci to Padre Martini in Bologna, which I don't have time to discuss here, provide further insight into his teaching methods and network of contacts. Additional evidence concerning Nucci's possible encouragement of castration is contained in Bricchieri Colombi's note of March 31st, which says, "The vicar of Pescia, that is Rofia, tells me that parents are exposing their sons to this sacrifice without any necessity, on the example of a few inhabitants of Pescia who are earning good salaries at the Royal Chapel in Lisbon. At least one castrato singer from Pescia who was employed at the Portuguese court, Antonio Vincenzo Michelotti, was demonstrably a student of Nucci, which suggests that it was Nucci in 1766 who was using that source of employment as an enticement to proceed with castration. The temptation of monetary gain was very real in Pescia in 1766, as Tuscany was then in the grip of a severe famine. The price of grain rose alarmingly during this period, and early in 1767, Bishop Arcangeli commissioned a census of the city's residents who were in extreme need. 878 out of a total population of about 4,200. The records of the meeting of the Consiglio di Stato of the 9th of May include materials consulted during it, and among these is a copy of a letter of April 21st that Commissario Rofia had sent. Any proposed remedy, he wrote, would not sufficiently combat the aforesaid abuse if such operations were not generally prohibited for the whole of the Grand Duchy, since inhabitants here, in Pescia, could take their sons to have the operation done in cities and places where there is not yet a prohibition. And I think that if orders are sent that are particular to this one province, the memory of such orders would reflect badly upon it, since they would reveal to other cities and to posterity the extent of the disaffection and the cruelty of parents against their own sons, enticed by a hope of a profit that is uncertain more times than not. To this letter, he appended a draft of an edict, which outlines measures similar to ones I've mentioned already. Rofia's views were seconded by Bricchieri Colombi in a note of April 30th. But from a letter Rofia sent on the 1st of June, it becomes clear that the measures ultimately taken were local, not general for Tuscany. This is his autograph letter. In execution of His Royal Highness's orders, I have alerted the doctors and surgeons established in this jurisdiction, and will also warn any foreign Norcini who show up in the future, so that they will in no way proceed with the aforesaid operation, if it is not found absolutely necessary. I have also ordered the sheriff to be vigilant in the observation of the orders. As I've implied, Cavaliere Nucci was shown some deference. Rather than being treated as a criminal, he was merely admonished through the tribunal of the Order of St. Stephen, the Grand Master of which was Pietro Leopoldo himself. What I've described thus far might seem to be a protracted and rather fumbling attempt to come to grips with a practice that, by the later 18th century, was almost universally condemned as morally repugnant. This is hardly surprising, though, since these officials were addressing only the supply side of the problem, not the continued demand for castration, whether from churches or theaters. And as I've suggested, as long as cerusici were part of the Tuscan public health and criminal justice systems, it would be difficult to crack down on Norcini, who were perceived, at least by some, as belonging to the same ceto or class. The Affare di Pescia also demonstrates how heavily economic factors must have weighed in families' decisions on whether to proceed with the operation. In closing, I'd like to point to a few additional avenues of investigation I am pursuing with regard to Cavaliere Nucci and his Scuola di Canto. One is the question of how Nucci might have integrated his musical activities into his identities as a citizen of Pescia and as a knight of the Order of St. Stephen. Regarding the former, it's worth noting that precisely in 1766, he is recorded as serving as a spedalingo, or rector, of the local hospital, which suggests that he possessed a certain amount of medical knowledge. Regarding the latter, the Order of St. Stephen, to which Nucci belonged and which chastised him for his behavior in this affair, was founded in 1561 by Cosimo de' Medici as a means of fighting Saracen pirates who were plaguing the Tuscan coast. The military role of the order gradually diminished, but members were still required to undergo military training on the order's galleys. Increasingly, though, the order became a mechanism for the creation of a Tuscan ruling class. The order's statutes state that candidates for investiture had to be of legitimate birth, unstained by infamy or heresy, and of sufficient wealth to support a noble lifestyle. They were specifically forbidden to practice vile or mechanical arts, though it says nothing about the fine arts, though mercatura magna et copiosa, or great and copious commerce, was allowed. Nucci, who donned the order's robes in 1712, that is a year after this picture, was certainly on the right side of this last rule, owning numerous farms in the area. This is a survey of family properties, and also being involved in the silk trade along with his wife. He made no secret of his musical activities, having oratorios of his own composition performed publicly, notably in Pistoia, and proudly signing his music manuscripts Cavaliere Bartolomeo Nucci, or simply CBN. This brings me to a final remarkable fact about this intriguing figure. A significant portion of his music library survives in the Music Library of the University of California, Berkeley. The collection includes original compositions by Nucci, as well as nearly a dozen large collections of arias and cantatas, such as this one. Individual pieces frequently indicate the singer and or theater for which they were written, as with this aria for the star tenor Angelo Amorevoli. Lacking an opening ritornello and any instrumental parts besides the bass, this score was likely for teaching purposes rather than performance. A consideration of Nucci as teacher is beyond the scope of this paper, but the dealings with Norcini of this pillar of the local community provide a useful demonstration of how castration for musical purposes could continue to be a viable practice well into the age of the Enlightenment. At the same time, the rich documentation of Tuscan officials' efforts to deal with this case show that it was still not entirely clear where the dividing line lay between cerusici as respected medical professionals and unscrupulous Norcini from somewhere else. Thank you.